Welcome to my park movie world. My name is Game World, and in this episode, I hope I can finish the Harry Potter themed area that I've been working on for a little while now. But I guess you have to stick to the very end to find out. So let's get into it. So welcome back to this episode, where in this episode, we're going to start with this coaster that I started a few episodes ago, where I need to finish the scenery. I also want to mention that I recorded this video on an older computer, which looked like it was going to explode every time I recorded. So just a heads up that some of the content will be a little laggy, but I got a new laptop, so hopefully in the future this should not happen. Also, before you go screaming in the comments that a laptop is not good for recording, I got a gaming laptop, so this should be good enough for recording videos. Now, let's get into building the queue. For the queue, I decided to start with a covered walkway, which I did by extending this building. Next is the queue barrier. For the queue barrier, I decided to use the wooden texture for the walls, but you also want to put details when you're building these things in your park. For my park, I decided to use the roof shingles texture for a post on my queue barrier. As you can see, I expanded the queue behind the Hogsmeade area, and cut to a very odd place in the queue. This is because a lot of my video got corrupted when I was recording, so from here on out we're going to move on to the rocks, and after I'm done putting all the scenery down, I'll come back and explain what I did. Well, now that I'm done with that, let's move on to the rocks, which I see as my mortal enemy. This is because for some odd reason when I'm building rocks, cliffs, or any other scenery in this game, I always have to keep rebuilding it since it doesn't look that good. But I'm going to make sure today that that won't be the case. Starting with this rock arch, which I built at the beginning of the coaster because I thought it looked good. As well as, I really needed something to fill up this area because I didn't really know what was going here anyway. Well, let's move on to, you guessed it, more rocks, where I decided to use the rocks to hide the supports in. What I decided to do was to put the rocks around the support, and color the supports light gray to make it look like it's still part of the story and it doesn't create a huge eyesore. This in the end actually turned out quite nice, and I actually enjoyed this process a lot. However, I did have to shift the rocks a little bit so it fits better with the support because it kind of looked weird when you were riding the coaster. Now with that, I decided to delete this ugly wall that I had back here and use rocks instead. I was kind of debating on this because I didn't know if I want to use trees or rocks, but in the end I decided to use the rocks because it looks a lot nicer. Now, the one thing you want to do in this game is to not make it look the same, especially when you're building rocks or trees or any other scenery of that matter, because in real life, no rock nor tree is congruent. Now, the one thing you may be asking, Game World, as you're copying and pasting the rocks along the side of the wall, wouldn't it look the same? Well, it isn't, because what I'm doing is shrinking the rocks that I built down to make it different from the last one, as well as making the angles different so it doesn't look the same in the end. Now, it's time to place some trees down using the new trees that we got in the last update, but I'm going to do this off screen since this process is pretty boring. Okay, here's what I did. I built some trees around this area, which is nothing too special. Anyway, as I try to find an angle to show you guys, but apparently I can't stop jumping. Oh, yeah, where did I go to? Give me a sec, guys, I'll be right back. So apparently, I fell in the one single hole that I have in my entire park, which I filled in a heartbeat. But anyway, what I was trying to say is, these trees make this coaster look a lot better, and creates a story about something flying through a forest, maybe a flying car. Now I decided to go back to the queue, because I looked at the covered pathway again, and I decided this was not doing justice, and I can do a better job at it. What I decided to add, I'm not 100% what it's called, but to the covered pathway I decided to add these fence-like artwork to it. But I guess you have to continue watching to see what I'm talking about. To start, I decided to give the covered pathway a more archway look at the front. This I did by giving it a 45-degree angle on either side and putting a piece in the middle. What was kinda annoying is this was so uneven after I was done building the archway, but we can definitely fix this by changing up the covered pathway a little bit by moving the pillars closer to fit the archway. After this, I decided to add a wooden trim at the bottom and started making the supports for the gate or fence style artwork that I'm building here, because I'm not 100% what it's called like I said before, so I'll be just calling it a fence or a gate from here on out. Now, as soon as I was done building the posts for the gate, I then move on to building the rungs that go in the middle, as well as all the little details. For the little details, I just added some pieces to where the rungs are being held to make it look more realistic. As you can see here, I added 4 rungs, and I'm now working on the trim of this fence, which is really more of an art design in this archway. With the trim of this fence now completed, I decided to make the top a little different with this X-like pattern. But I quickly realized that a simpler design was definitely a lot better than a more complex one, because the complex design make it look like there was too much going on. Now I decided to paint the gate with a golden color and a metal texture. Now, when I was painting the gate, the one thing that I was trying to avoid was to make it look more like Harry Potter, not something that looks like it came from the lost city of Atlantis. Now that I finished painting the gates, I'm going to copy the gates over off screen, since this is kind of the same process over and over again. And I'll get back to you once I get to the station. Actually, I decided to build the coaster station off screen since it got too repetitive. Instead, let's work on the supports on the opposite side of the coaster, which is still not finished. For this side, I decided to not do too much detail to the supports, since you won't be able to see much of it anyway, because a lot of it will be covered by bushes and trees, but I did put some details where it's needed. Like this piece here, which I'm building to make it look like it's connected to the track. After I was done with the supports, I decided to build this tree that looks like it's been fallen on the ground, and it's the exit out of the Harry Potter area. I didn't really need this, but I actually decided to place it here because I thought it looked cool. This comes to show, the more detail you put into your park, the better it may look. Unless you put too much detail, then it may look a little weird. And I mean, when you put too much detail, I mean when you place too much stuff in your park. Now, with that note, I started off detailing this tree, starting with the branch at the very top of this tree that I used for the supports for some of the coaster. Now, as I'm building the tree, I am trying very hard to make sure this tree looks very natural. Please let me know down in the comments how well that you think I did. Moving on to the second branch. For this branch, I decided to use it as a support for this side of the coaster. The second branch is a longer but skinnier branch than the first one. I did this so I can give the tree more variation, as well as I thought it looked cool and more realistic. Another thing that I did for the second branch is arch it over the third coaster piece that goes through this area. I also forgot to mention that this coaster goes over the pathway, and is the other reason why I decided to build this tree-like structure over the pathway. So it kinda acts like a covered walkway from the coaster that's overhead. Now, it's time to color the tree. For the tree, I decided to use 2 different colors of brown. Using the wooden texture, I'm hoping to accomplish to make it look more like a tree. The reason why I'm using 2 different colors of brown is to hopefully to make it look more natural. Now it's time for the third branch, which is basically the same thing as the last 2, so enjoy this time lapse of me building it. With that being completed, let's move on to placing more trees down, which is nothing too special. And apparently, after that, I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but I know I don't know what to do, so I'll get back to you once I figure it out. I finally decided on what to do. I decided to build the fences along the pathway, so people can know where to walk. So for the fence, I decided to do a simple design, which is just a post and 3 rails. Take that back, I mean 2 rails. Now, as soon as I was done making sure everything looks right, I then went in painting this fence. And for the rails, I used the orangish brown color. But once again, this is the most tedious process to build in the game, so I'll get back to it once I place all the fences down along the pathway. Okay, here's what I did. To start, I colored the coaster track dark gray. I also added this net over this pathway, which I built off screen since it was so tedious to make. Next, I added these fences around the pathway and also did this off screen since this process is so boring to build. I also added this log that looked like it's fallen over this path and made it so it's the exit out of the Harry Potter themed area, which I also think this log turned out quite nice. Lastly, I added all the trees and scenery around this area. Now, let's move on to the station, which I also built off screen. So, the next thing that I built off screen is the coaster station. This is because the coaster station is pretty much the same as the queue. So, what I did in the coaster station was added these orange lights to give it this cool orange glow. Next, added these gates where you wait for the coaster to come. Lastly, for the exit, I just added some junk here, nothing too special, which is just some crates, barrels, and other things like a chest. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have for the station. Lastly, I built the rest of the queue off screen, starting with the trees, which gives this really cool vibe like you're in the dark forest of Harry Potter. Another thing that really gives a cool vibe is this arch rockway that goes over the path, which I feel looks really cool. Also, the coaster flies by as you're walking through the queue, which also gives a very cool touch to the queue. Next, you keep walking down this way, it takes you to the station, which I explained earlier. I also want to mention that I changed the covered pathway gates to this wooden color, as well as the station gate to this wooden color instead of the gold color, even though it did take forever to paint. I do like this better, and it does fit a little better with the Harry Potter theme than the gold texture. Anyway, I'm afraid that is all I have time for this episode, since this episode will be way too long otherwise, so I'll have to split it up into another part. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. So, bye for now.